Okay, welcome. Today, Lauren, Christine, and I are going to be talking about Sun transits 39 and 53. And we are going to explore around, see what we can learn and what we can play with over the next two periods of 5.5 days. We're going to start off talking a little bit about this gate 52 we're still in, and a little bit about stillness. So, Lauren, you had something you were thinking.
Well, yeah, because I've had to keep reminding myself that, oh yeah, I am supposed to be still. And I feel that external pressure is slowing me down. And yet there is this internal, like my list to do keeps getting longer and longer. And so I found myself this morning like out of breath almost like, oh my God, there's like all this stuff. And then, as I was prepping, I went back and I was like, oh yeah, but I'm not supposed to be doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I've kind of had a slightly different experience of stillness in that I've been actually busier and more productive over the last couple of days, but I feel still around the pressure to do it, which is interesting because this is a pressure gate in 52. It is in our root system. Um, but there's just something, the stillness I'm feeling is more internal. It's much more like none of this really matters. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's in a good way. And like whatever I'm doing because I'm in response to it. And that's all that matters is that I'm just in response to it. I haven't been in my head as much about like, will people like it? Will it resonate? Does the like, so it's interesting. Like I've felt the stillness kind of that way in the last couple of days.
Interesting. It's like I had years ago, I had this experience when it was in a bit of turmoil, and I went and I sat along the water and I was watching the, um, the waves, and it was quite choppy on the surface. And then as I sat there, I was like, 'cause I started feeling into it, and I went, well, actually, down beneath the surface, it's all calm. And so it's been even like this week. Sometimes I'm sort of reminding myself, it's like, oh yeah, that's just on the surface. And, but there's lots of it there on the surface.
Yeah. Yeah. Dropping into it. What I have found to be true is that when I do, it's definitely feels supported. Like last night, instead of the six things I was supposed to do, I went off to yoga and to a class I don't usually go to. And it was in the evening, and I thought, I'm really tired. Should I really be here? Boy, I dropped into that class in no time at all and totally felt like, oh, this is exactly where I'm meant to be, which sounds a little bit like what you were sharing, Christine, like you that because you're in your flow, right? You're where you're meant to be, and whatever that is for each of us. I think the universe comes through and says, yep, you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's the still point, right?
Mm,
Like when we find and we meet that thing that we're supposed to be doing in the moment from our embodied
mm,
wisdom, that
mm,
is where
yeah.
stillness happens, right? We all, I think, can recognize that point. And it's not something, and we have whole industries around seeking out stillness, but I think that what we're talking about is that stillness happens when we're aligned energetically, right?
I like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Which is a really nice segue into the
Yeah.
next transit. It's like that
Yeah.
looking in and looking without. So,
Yeah, yeah. And so that's true. Like we have been in this still, or we will have been in this stillness gate 52 for a while. We're recording this like midway through the transit. But the next gate is gate 39, which is the provocateur, right? And so in human design, this gate, this energy is also a root energy. It's also fuel. It's an individual energy, and it is here to provoke, right? And we think about provoking as a as not a great word, like kind of a negative word, like just kind of just to make things happen to make things happen. Which is not untrue. Again, I have some experience with this gate. Both of my sons have this as a primary sun energy in their designs, and this like fuel to push at things that need to be pushed at, right? Like I am here to tell you for sure they were here to push at things in me, right? Things I would never have ever discovered about myself or grown through or done at all had they not been here to do that provoking, right? And so I think of this provoking, the hexagram is obstruction. And so it is the energy to push through obstructions, push through things in order to grow and to learn. And that's what the provoking energy is here for too, to push others. Mostly it can be an outward focused thing. It's also a self, and it's an individual energy. It's also pushing yourself to do new and different things. But it is here not to just to create havoc, it's here to create growth, right? And so as we're coming out of this still point, I think it will be an interesting contrast because I suspect that we will all feel this this push to like, well, we have so many obstructions in the world, right? And so I think we're going to be looking at obstructions maybe a little bit differently in this time frame.
Well, when I think of that, I also think of obstructions emotionally too, that we might be pushing at not only our blocks, but relationship blocks. And so just listening to this and feeling into the hexagram information, I felt this push, right? And if you feel it on that low density level, it's irritating.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might be our real clue to feel it, if we're feeling irritated by it or the energy, we're not experiencing these days in our highest potential.
Yeah, it's interesting because with Rena Magnuson, the coyote, the trickster. So I was thinking about the trickster energy and how like prevalent that is when you look like at Southwestern indigenous belief systems and how much reverence there is for the trickster. And so, but looking at the sort of these different levels, like different frequencies we're at with the trickster, and it's like down in that shadow frequency where we're pushing each other's buttons and reacting, um, and it feels icky, right? It just feel irritated and annoyed. And but then when you look at like a trickster, like a coyote or a cocopelli in the Hopi tradition, it's like it's having fun with what's going on. It's in there and it's poking and but it's playful. And so there's uh it's a more expansive thing that comes out of it rather than just shutting down. It's pushing you to something more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love that trickster idea and image because, that perfectly aligns with the gene keys too, right? The provocation is the shadow, right? Provoking. And this is something we know about human design. Often, it's talked about the fact that a lot of the language that Ra channeled through in human design was more shadowy language, right? And so this is one of the reasons the gene keys can be such a lovely additional bit of knowledge for anybody that's studying human design, because often Richard Rudd does a great job of saying, yeah, that's true about this energy, but it's also true that dynamism in this case is the gift and liberation is the city, right? And so when I think about this trickster, of poking fun and the jester, the court jester, right? All of these, these archetypes are playfully poking fun at what needs to be seen, what needs to be more dynamic, right? What needs to shift and be reassessed, in order for liberation, right? In order to be free of the shadow of the thing that we aren't doing correctly. So I really like that trickster image around this gate 39.
It's interesting too when Richard Rudd's talking about it, is that it's almost like we need to get angry to move towards the dynamism. And like he talks about people who they sort of bunker down and sort of keep things really tight in their lives, and they don't show their anger. But that's then keeping us from making this evolutionary move. So, and I thought back in my own life and the one huge pivotal shift, and it was I got angry and like really angry, and the results were rather dramatic. But it was a huge shift for me in finally growing up.
Well, I agree with everything you say, Lois, but it's really hard for me to picture you angry. What about you, Christine?
Well, it makes me think of the last class I took with Martin Grassinger. He talked about about divine anger, right? Which I just never heard that particular phrasing before. Of course, I've heard righteous anger, but for me, righteous anger brings up a bunch of religiosity that I don't necessarily I don't, it just didn't resonate for me. But when he said divine anger, I was like, oh, yeah, that's that thing, right? And this is a place, and it's exactly what you just explained, Lois, right? We get to a place, I think, especially as women, where it takes that moment of like, enough, like that divine anger, like, I am no longer taking this. I am no longer doing this. And not so much even because of me, but because of the world, right? Like, I don't if I take this, then this means other people are taking this, and this means that, right? Like it's just this understanding of our collectiveness and our collective being that somehow it's just not acceptable. And that's what it takes sometimes for us to be like, this is not acceptable for anyone, not just me, right? And that divine anger, I think, is really beautiful. And I really love that term. I was really grateful for him to just bring that to me that in a slightly different way that I hadn't really heard before.
Well, and the other thing that I think comes up here with that is using that divine anger to do something different. Because when I do something different, you have to respond differently. And I think this is where we can feel the world stuck in, repeating the same things over and over again. And it's, you know, hard not to think of the world stage as we think of these 5.5 days in this gate, and thinking about this move from provocation to liberation. And then the American Independence Day falls right in the middle of it, which is quite interesting. It would be interesting to know if that gate was so at the historic date of that in 1776.
Yeah, it must be. I didn't look it up, but of course it's right between provocation and beginnings, right?
Yeah.
That's where the Fourth of July falls.
Well, I think we're all ready for some doing things differently and some new beginnings. But before we move on, I want to share a Gemmo that I think about. So in Hilary Barrett's interpretation of this hexagram, she asks the questions about how can you view obstacles differently. And this is where the trickster comes in, and the playfulness of, oh, well, I'll just go this way or I'll go that way. And one of the extracts that's very good for helping us get out of our narrow way of thinking, and probably more a negative view of thinking, is black honeysuckle. Black honeysuckle also creates a fluidity and helps you move through narrow passageways or obstacles. So I think it could be really useful, particularly helping us move from that anger, which we're talking about, or the frustration or disturbance, into actually being able to move through into action.
Yeah.
Related to that, there was something I was thinking about in terms of our practice that we didn't touch on, how much taking things personally shows up in a particular gate, and how often when people do things, it really has nothing to do with us, and yet it touches something deeply in us and we react. And like people know those are our buttons. But is to just take a step back and wonder, are we taking something personally? It's like, is this really about me, or is that actually just about the person that just said what they said? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so true. And it is one of the things I like best about human design is that it just so there's something about the understanding of the energetic mechanics of each of us that I find very helpful to be able to like take that step back, right? And say for a moment, is this is this anything about me, or is this just their energetics playing out in the way it's gonna play out, right? And very often, almost always, if I have the presence of mind to do that, it's never about me.
No, but that's always what we think of first, right? Because we're confident you are doing this just to irritate me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's also a natural outgrowth of just how our brains develop, right? Like up until about 7, we are the center of our world. We do believe that everything happens because we did it. This is why so many children struggle when parents get divorced and when they aren't doing well, right? The child thinks that they are the cause, right? And it is very difficult for our brain to shift out of that once we get a bit more mature, right? Like that's just a conditioned state of where we're at. And so, yeah, it does feel like everything is because of us. We are the center of our own world, right? From a story perspective, but you know, um, I guess speaking of beginnings as children, that would go right to gate 53 of beginnings. And I hadn't thought about, Lauren, this idea about the 4th of July. I want to go and double check
Sure.
exactly what that was, what gate it was in, but either way, either gate would be very appropriate for this new beginning of a new country, right? Like the provocation was definitely there for years, and then all of a sudden they're like, we're done, we're starting something new, right? And that's very much what this energy is here for. This is another root energy, right? So we're in this adrenalized fuel energy for a few weeks actually, right? We're in gate 52 right now, also a root energy, right? So we're in this stretch of this kind of pushing pressurized energy, and we may all feel some pressure, right? Pressure this week to be still, pressure next week to mess things up a bit, push on some buttons, right? Pressure the following week to start something new, right? And personally, I love that for all of us. I think collectively, that also has a huge message for us, right? We can definitely see. I was just listening, I don't listen to much news anymore, but I just heard that a young man who was running for the New York City mayoral's race unexpectedly won a primary. Nobody really saw that coming against a very seasoned professional politician, right? And so I was like, right? Well, that's very provoking, right? It provokes both the internal structures and the external structures. And so I just think that if we pay attention, we might see more of these collective provocations and collective new beginnings, which in many ways I feel personally like I'm ready for.
Well, Christine, you made a really good point there because we tend to focus on what's not changing. And this is a really good time. And I think Gate 53 will open us up to that. Um, Hillary Barrett asked the question, what is evolving here? And what a beautiful meditation each morning. If we could each, in our time to start our day, and however we do that, whether we're sitting or we're walking or laying in bed before we get moving, is ask that question: what is evolving here? And what a lens, too. I mean, talk about a positive take on things instead of what we hear what's falling apart, what isn't working anymore, right?
Yeah.
I think in remembering in that too is that evolution is a slow moving process rather unlike revolution, right? And so recognizing that changes take time in terms like, there's 2 steps forward and 4 steps back, and and sort of just being really gentle with ourselves as this plays out, um and like not getting too caught because it could feel really bumpy, I think, along the way. And there's so many fears because we don't know what's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think about these root energies as fueling in many ways, fueling our fears, right? Like this is this kind of adrenalized energy that can be used in those ways, right? To just keep hammering on the things that we're afraid of. But again, this is, if we look at the Gene Keys approach, every shadow has its gift and has its higher expression, right? And so when we become aware of this thing that we're doing, where we're doubling down on our fear and always looking at the fear and always being afraid and always being this, being concerned about all the things that are going on in the world that look horrible, right? It takes our energy away from being able to say, yeah, and also the opposite is true, right? And also other options are, possible. So I just think it's a good time, especially in this like beginnings thing, to remember that, I think a lot of people I feel are worried about this being an ending. Like that's what I keep hearing. Oh, this way of life that we've known forever and it's been so great, it's ending, right? But that inherently means that it's also a beginning, right? And so I'm a person that's like, yep, cool, see it, it's ending, but that means something new is going to happen. I'm super excited about that, right? And being able to stay in this excited and expectant space as opposed to this afraid because of the uncertainty space, also a practice. But I do think the energies are here. And definitely from a human design perspective, in the next couple of years, there's a lot of energetic support for giving us the backbone essentially to be like, you know what? I don't know what's coming, but it's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. That's the thing we need to learn. Not that it's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. I know that I can trust myself to handle whatever comes my way. And this is the lesson that we're being given the opportunity to learn right now repeatedly.
It's interesting because in the Gene Keys, the shadow is immaturity.
Mhm.
Right? And when you look at consciousness studies and they look at the level where most people in the world are, it's sort of topping out at adolescent. So there's a lot of room for maturity in our world. And so, I mean, this is like kind of like moving through being a teenager and actually going to be a grown up now. I mean, it's hugely unknown personally when that's going on. So why wouldn't it be collectively the same thing? It's like nobody, like when you're a teenager, you don't know what it being an adult's going to be like. You've got a lot of ideas about what it's going to be, and then you find out that's got nothing to do with it. But so it's and it's here for us to create.
Yeah.
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 Well, I think you both bring up so beautifully that it's our choice. And to remember that every single day, it's our choice how we're going to view this and to move forward with activities that affirm I'm going to be okay. And that in itself, I think it could be life-changing for you, is when you choose something you're going to do or watch or a person to talk to, are they affirming that I'm okay, they're okay, or are they affirming something else and bringing up that fear in me? um, I'd like to think for a few minutes, just ponder our Gemmo for this period. And it's really lovely because, the most immature part of a plant is the seed. So if we look to silver birch seeds during this period, silver birch seed is a really incredible tonic, but in a different way of any other tonic that exists. It's not pushing something to happen. Instead, it is fuel for your brain. And if we're going to work during this period with how our brain views things and changing our way of thinking, this would be a wonderful extract, but it literally follows, a seed literally follows the gene key stages, right? From immaturity to expansion to superabundance. And we can see that out in the world if you're living in the Northern Hemisphere right now, of the superabundance of whatever those seeds were. So I recommend that in a microdose. I think that could do some really lovely things for your, if you pair it with the intention of seeing things through a different lens.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think just to go back to what Lois was saying too, this idea about adolescence. And I know that I think that, you know, are of a certain generation, and I think that maybe when I say this, it may not resonate for younger people. But from my perspective, from my generation, adolescence was a time of embracing uncertainty, right? Like I thought, at least for the most part, I was excited about becoming an adult, right? And I think mostly teenagers are excited about becoming an adult. Now, again, we may be totally misunderstanding what adulthood is like, but we were anticipating this amazing thing that was going to be, right? And I just think that it might be a nice thing. Like if you did experience that for yourself as a young person, try to tap back into that to remind ourselves that uncertainty doesn't have to be scary, right? Uncertainty can be exciting, right? It is where possibility lives. And so, this thing about these new beginnings and this provocation and the world as it is, like, it is our choice to be scared about the uncertainty or embrace it and be excited and hope for the best and trust that we can all manage it, right? And so I don't know, there's something about that seed metaphor and the adolescent human thing coming together for me in a way that I'm just like, yeah, it could be just amazing superabundance too, right?
Yeah.
You just made me think about a saying that has stood out for me from one of my favorite authors, is Robert Augustus Masters. And he makes this statement: is fear is just excitement in drag. But like the fears, right? And actually in our bodies, fear and excitement, they feel the same. It's just are we interpreting it? But this gene key is also a lot about facing our fears.
Mhm.
And part of the fear comes from that, like, feeling alone and feeling dependent. Like I'm dependent on the social structures. I'm just dependent on all these people. I can't look after myself. Um, and then we move into this place of independence, right? Interesting, you're talking about Independence Day, but there's that also in American culture, the rugged independence,
Mhm.
and which is really highly thought of. But in that move to superabundance, we're moving to interdependence. And so there's this recognition that we're in it together.
Yeah.
We're not alone, and to know it and to be willing to look, for the support and the communities that are there around us.
Yeah. I love that.
So, are we facing our fears?
We did it again.
Well, it's not easy, right? And like number one, letting them rise up, and then number two, actually stepping in and um and just like facing them straight on. I know, like, it's one of the reasons that I started volunteering at hospice,
Mm.
because I knew so little about death. And I knew so little, I didn't even know, like this was just something out there. But just the stepping in and the being with it gave me a whole new relationship to it. So like there's all kinds of things in our lives that we can be fearful of, and we can be pretty good at avoiding them.
Yeah.
But to sort of just take them on and look at them and find out they're really not as scary as we think they are. So it feels very complete again today. Thank you for being with us, and we hope we'll see you next time.